Hello, magical ones. Welcome to the Fairy Stitch vlog. Today, I thought I would do a little fairy discussion. Basically, I thought we would talk about seeing fairies, which is obviously still quite a subject to talk about. For those of you who are brand new to the podcast, welcome, and to those of you who've checked me out before, welcome back. I appreciate it. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. That would be great. Basically what we talk about is fairies and fairyology, but there's a lot of artwork, there's knitting, there's books, there's poetry sometimes, a little baking now and then, a little gardening now and then, and of course we do talk about animals, mainly cats now and then. So there's a lot to cover. You never know what you're going to get or when you're going to get it, because I don't stick to a schedule. So again, it would be handy for you to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. So, having said all that, if you'd like to donate to us, that would be fantastic. I would very much appreciate it, as I have no income. It would be great to be able to provide for my family again. So if you'd like to donate, you have options. There is the PayPal link, and there is now the Ko-fi.com page where you can be a donator one time, you can donate monthly and become a member, or you can purchase something from the shop, which include quilts and fairy dolls, witch dolls, artwork, my classes. I definitely have 4 or 5 classes on there now that you can take, one being the fairyology course, or excuse me, that is coming. That is not available yet. That is coming. But the Fairycraft Magic Beginner course is there. You have the Black Cat seminars on there. There is the new Poppets and Magical Dolls course is also on there. And a few other things. Cats with Kids training course. Again, there's another one. So please take a class if nothing else, or make a donation if you would like. Again, that is on our Ko-fi page. It is below the channel name in blue, or you can check out the description box for the link. Either way is fine. I appreciate it. So, today, what were we going to talk about? Well, let's sprinkle a little fairy dust and see what we can conjure up, right? So, today I thought I would talk about my experience years ago where I saw a fairy. And I am a certified fairyologist. I am a fairy artist, so I do have some educational background, of course, in what I'm talking about and what I talk about frequently on these podcasts. So, today, let's talk about my one and only experience where I actually saw one. And yes, I do very much believe I saw one. Now, first of all, it occurred in my magical lair, and I can't take my camera in there. I am sorry, the way my computer's broken, and if you saw my problem vlog page or episode where I talked about the problems going on recently, you know all about it, so I won't get into it here. But I can't move my camera or my computer into the room. But again, check out my magical lair episode, which should be premiering soon if it hasn't already, and you'll see the room where it actually occurred. Back then, though, that was my bedroom. Now it's the magical lair. But back when this happened, I was sleeping in there. It was my bedroom. So it was right around the time that I was just starting out learning about fairies and fairyology. I was taking classes, I was reading books, I was keeping a journal, and it was late in the evening, so it's been over 4 or 5 years, I think, when this happened. And we're currently 2025, so this was a while back. But I haven't forgotten it, because it was a one-time wondrous event. And basically what was going on was that I had gone to bed. It was dark in the room. There were no night lights. There was no light on in the room. And no TV. I didn't have a TV in there, so there was no TV, no light of any kind is what I'm trying to say. The street lights didn't come through because, they're fairly dim, but the curtain kind of blocked it out, so you didn't see much of it. And so what happened was I was going to bed, laying on my back, going to sleep, and I just hadn't gotten there yet. And so I was closing my eyes, and I'd open them again for a couple of minutes, and I'd close them again, trying to relax, trying to just let go, clear your mind, do that nightly ritual of just letting it out. And it was during one of the times my eyes kind of flickered open, and I saw this little light, about so big, not far from me. So I'm, laying back, and it's right maybe about here. So, it's, about what, 3 feet away, kind of in the air, more against the wall, right above me. And it was quick. It was a flicker. It was fast. It was here and gone. And I thought, but the thing was, it was bright enough that it caught my attention. It held my attention for a couple of seconds. And when I looked around the room, there was no reason for it. There was nothing in the room. No lit candles. Nothing, no mechanical things. The phone wasn't near me or on or anything. There was no reason for this flicker of light to show up right above me, hover for, almost a minute. It was fast, but, just, there, and then it was gone. And it was like, and I got up. It was enough to get my attention. It was enough to get me back up. And I looked around the room, and I'm like, what caused that? Because, if it's just a little flicker of light, I wouldn't have cared. It wouldn't have gotten my attention. It wouldn't have been worth mentioning here. It wouldn't, nothing. This was enough, bright enough, and it hovered. It was like it hovered, it stayed there almost for a minute. And then it just was gone again, like it hadn't been there at all. And there was no explanation for it in the room. Nothing. There was no little laser light. There was no toy that would have reflected. There was no mirror, and the mirror, and it wouldn't have flickered that. Anyway, there was no car passing by on the street, so it wasn't like, and I got out, and I did look. I looked out the window. There was no cars. There was nobody walking by with flashlight or anything like that. There was no reason for this, except it had to have been a fairy, because I had been working on my fairyology most of the day. I'd been studying, I'd been journaling, I'd been working on some artwork, I'd been investigating a class, this kind of thing. And I had been working, so this fairyology and the fairy stuff had been on my mind. And so even doing that, that's a way to communicate with the fairies. And so I probably was already, was talking to them. They didn't, and I didn't know it. And so I don't doubt the fact that that was my one and only fairy experience where they actually came to me. And like I say, that was like my first year of studying fairies and fairyology. So again, I was very much into it. I was very much into the connecting with them and learning about them. And my brain had been on that wavelength all day, working on all this. And so even though I wasn't actually communicating with them and talking to them or calling them to me, obviously just by doing all of that was enough that I got their attention. And so they acknowledged it. So, but I didn't know I was communicating with them. So it's interesting how that happens. But yeah, I do believe that. It never happened again. It never happened again. I never saw that same kind of flicker of light. Never had that experience. So again, that furthers my belief that it was a fairy encounter, that I did see it, that they let me know they were there. And every once in a while, during those first couple of years especially, I could feel them. It felt like they were nearby. It felt like they were inspiring me with my projects. And they're like, do a fairy doll. Make a fairy doll. Or if I was working on artwork, they'd be like, turn this figure into a fairy. We want to see Faerie, because I hadn't done it originally. It would be just a standard figure or whatever, a bust of a head, and then all of a sudden I'd get this thought and like, I could turn that into a fairy with the wings, and the ears, and I'd go ahead and do it. So I don't doubt that they inspired me, and I still feel, because it's been years now, and I'm still, very much into fairies, but I feel like because of all the stresses and the problems I'm going through right now, I feel like I've kind of been pulled away from them, even though I'm still doing fairy art, I'm still knitting the fairy dolls, I'm still doing the fairy videos, I'm still studying, I'm still reading the books, I still maintain my fairy garden and the fairy ring and all that. So they're always here, they're always on my mind. Maybe it's just because I'm not as conscious of the newness of it anymore. It's more, it's daily, it's routine, or it's just, this is part of it, I feel them for a little bit, and then I don't, and it may go weeks before I feel like I'm actually nearby with them again. And then other times, it might be even longer, and then all of a sudden I'll get like, just a thought, or maybe I'd be like, yeah, I kind of feel like somebody was here, like maybe they were here a minute ago, and it's gone again, real easy, real quick. But yeah, that was kind of my experience. I know it wasn't as dramatic as it could be. I'm afraid I'm not a storyteller. Matthew is much more of a better storyteller. He could have relayed this much better, but it was my experience. I wanted to communicate it as best I could as I remember it. But again, I do believe that was my encounter, because it never happened again after that. And there was no reason to have that light and have that light flicker and hover. Hang on for at least a minute, long enough for me to actually stare at it, and try to make a conscious thought of, what am I looking at? Where'd that come from? And enough to get me up and look around the room and look out the window and try to find a reason for it. There was no reason for it. So I do believe very much that was the fairies, and actually acknowledging, welcome to the fold, welcome to the the fairy universe, the fairy realm, and like, we'll be watching. We'll be nearby. So I do believe that. And again, if you have a fairy experience you want to talk about, please leave a comment. Let me know. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you encountered. It would be cool to understand and see, because there are a lot of us out there who have had fairy encounters. There's Facebook pages dedicated to it. There's groups that study it. There's still like a little fairy census occasionally. It's done, I think, once a year, where they gather information and encounters and log it in. So again, don't be afraid. Safe space here. If you want to tell me about it, great. Feel free to. I won't judge you, because fairies can come to us in different forms. Keep in mind, fairies can come as light, as I described. They can be animals. They can transform. They can actually take human form. I do believe that. They can take human form. There's plenty of folklore throughout the centuries, England, Ireland, Scotland, where they talk about it, where, there's an encounter with someone, a being who acts weird, but, at least what we consider to be weird, this kind of thing, or something's off. But, they've taken that form. How many stories have you heard about the changelings? The changelings are fairy creatures, not ones you really want to encounter, but they do take the form of human babies, they get switched, kind of. There's folklore a lot in Ireland, especially, where they talk about, changeling stories. Look it up if you're interested. But those creepy, but, they can take human form. They can be here among us. You don't know it, There's signs, but we won't get into that today. But there are signs that maybe this person could be. Then again, you could be one, and you don't know it. Or maybe you do. There are some people who do know that they were fairies or that they are fairies. I don't believe that I am one. I don't believe I have ever been one, but I don't know. There's certain things about my personality and the way I behave, the things I think about sometimes, my sensitivity to things a lot. Of course, some people would say, well, you're just an empath. And that's possible. I don't know. I haven't looked into it enough. But, I could be, but I don't really believe I am. I just feel that during the last 10 years, I've come to this late. I've come to this late in life. I just feel that I feel more of a kinship to the fairies, and which led me into fairy craft magic. So now I'm a practitioner at fairy craft magic, as I've talked about before. So, it's branched out because I've been an artist way before I looked into becoming a fairyologist. And the thing is, when I was younger, I always loved fairy tales. Disney was great. I had Disney figures, and I always loved the movies and all of that. And I always had that kind of mentality, try to look at life as being happy and a fairy tale, And granted, it's not reality, and I know that now. But, back then, I was into fairy tales. I don't remember having a real kinship to fairies, though. It's really weird. I don't feel a kinship to it. But then again, I didn't know about fairyology when I was a child. I didn't know that there was a whole study of fairies. The only fairy I really encountered was maybe in a children's book, or, of course, Tinkerbell, and Tinkerbell's great. I'm just saying that that's kind of where what I had and where I left off, and I never got into it. And my mother and my parents didn't really encourage it. She was fine with enjoying fairy tales, but I was never really encouraged to be free, to kind of think for yourself, to try the other path that wasn't usually taken. That was not encouraged. It was, very do it my way. And, you need to be good, and this is reality, and you need to, but she would allow me to have fairy tale encounters, and of course Disneyland was always one of our favorite places. We try to go once a year, that kind of thing, and I always look forward to it. But again, it was the Disney version. It wasn't the fairy realm reality version, I just wasn't encouraged with that. And so I've come to it very late, all this about fairyology, but I'm glad I have, and I find that it helps me get through the day, it helps me get through the week, and it keeps me alive, keeps me going. Otherwise, I would have ended my life already. It's been rough, and it continues to get rough, so I'm not denying my reality. I'm not living in a fairy tale and trying to dispel all of that. But again, I'm under a lot of more pressure and stress these days, and so I feel like my connection to the fairies has been pulled a bit, that I don't feel them as often, I don't feel them as strongly. But again, I'm always thinking about them, because I'm always working with them in one form or another. So I don't feel that they've abandoned me. I'm not seeing them. I'm not feeling them as much. And again, they allowed me that one encounter, but I've not had it since. But I do feel that they are nearby. And every once in a while, there'll be something. There'll be a butterfly in the garden, because we don't get butterflies that often. I'd see a butterfly go in the, it's like, oh my gosh. Did I just see that? Or dragonflies. They take forms of dragonflies. Or remember, fairies will use animals to ride on to save them. So if they don't want to fly or whatever, they will ride on an animal. They'll ride on birds. They can ride on a dragonfly. They can ride on bigger animals, rabbits and squirrels and dogs. And, it is hitch a ride, and get where they need to go. Or they can transform into the animal. They can be an insect. They can be a ladybug. They can be the dragonfly. They could be the butterfly. I don't know. So again, you don't want to harm them. You don't want to capture them because you don't know what you're dealing with. But the fact that I may see one now and then, when we don't see them very often, I like to think, that was a fairy encounter right there. So that does occur a little bit more, but as far as that flashing light, that one little hovering light, I only had that one time. But again, they could be the birds, they could be the dragonfly, or, the fact that they came over, like a little dragonfly goes flying right over my head, when there's plenty of room, plenty of space out there for him to fly anywhere else, but he flies right over me, like, I want you to see me, And I'm like, oh my gosh. And since we don't get those very often, I do believe too that those are my fairy encounters. I do believe that seeing that fancy moth or that butterfly or seeing a ladybug, I do believe that those are the fairies as well. So I am getting that nature encounter. It's just the one time with the light, those little twinkling light. That's the only time. So I wanted to talk about it, and I thank you for watching this because I hope you found it interesting. And if you'd like to comment or like to tell me about your encounter, please leave the comment. That would be fantastic. If you like the video, please like it. Please subscribe. I appreciate it. And again, the fairies are out there, whether we feel them, see them or not. They're there. We just have to be able to be open to it and be able to acknowledge it if we do get lucky to see one. And again, it can be in a lot of different forms, so you never know. Be open to the experience and just be thankful when you do see one. And just let them go on their own. Let them go on their own way. They stopped by for a reason, but let them go. And just be grateful that you got to see one in whatever form they chose. But be grateful and, again, let me know what you think. Let me know what your encounter was. I appreciate it. So again, have a very good day. Thank you so much for watching this. We'll see you in the next video, knock on wood. Bye-bye for now.